I'm talking to Nirj, a member of the European Parliament, who thinks that the entire construct of the European Union is broken. Nirj, thank you very much for talking to RT. Now, first of all, how do you characterise the EU's relationship with the UK at the moment?
Well, it may not be very obvious to many people, but we in the EU now initiate about 75% of the legislation that a person in the UK lives under, or in Hungary, or in Slovakia, or Lithuania, or Estonia, or wherever in the EU. So it's a very powerful legislative relationship, which extraordinarily the people of Europe, people of Britain, are totally unaware of. I want to create a much more awareness and accountability between EU legislation, which overrides national legislation, and the people whom we legislate for. But unfortunately, in Britain, the British media is totally oblivious to what goes on in Brussels. And when I ask my friends in the British media, why don't you cover what's going on in Brussels? It says it's like watching paint dry. So if they want excitement, guns and circuses, well, they go to the House of Commons. But politics is not entertainment. It is a considered business of how to govern various interests. And it is very sad, really, that this relationship between the governed and the governors is so opaque in Europe.
Do you think it's possible at this stage to then take that power and give it back to the individual countries?
Well, I think that will happen in time, because the construct which has been created, the European Union, is getting increasingly unmanageable. Take, for example, we have created a foreign minister for the whole of Europe, who speaks with one voice for the whole of Europe. But there's also going to be a foreign minister for 27 member states. So how can you have one voice? Is William Hague not to utter a word as the British foreign minister? That's nonsense, of course not. William Hague will set out his own stall, his own policies and his own agenda. And so will the Polish foreign minister, or the Latvian, or the Estonian, or the Lithuanian, and the Hungarian, and so on. So what are they to do? Are they going to be quiet and let Cathy Ashton, the High Representative, speak on their behalf? No. They will all have views, and there'll be a cacophony be a Tower of Babel. And the outside world will think, hey, what are these guys doing? Who do we speak to?
So what's the point of it? Is it just bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy?
The point of it is that they're trying to create a country, when the people whom they are creating the country for have no particular desire to have a country called Europe created. So the elites want a country called Europe created, and they're steaming on ahead with it, but the people not carrying the people. And one day there's going to be such a train wreck over this whole issue.
And when you say train wreck, what do you mean?
It will stop functioning, and then there will be a slow realization that it's not working. And then when it's not working, and the crisis comes, like we had recently with the financial crisis, we saw there was no European response. It was the Germans bailing out the Greeks, or somebody else coming in to bail out somebody else. But it was not an EU thing. And now we are told that it's the Chinese coming to bail out the Greeks and save the Eurozone. Where's Europe in all this? So there you are. We are supposed to have created this economic bloc, a trading bloc, a very powerful bloc. But when there's a crisis, it is individual member states who have to pick up the pieces. And slowly it's now beginning to dawn on the elites who run all this, that this is not working.
Is what we're seeing now the beginning of the end of the Eurozone?
I don't know. It will be damaging either way, because if the Eurozone collapses, it will damage our economy too, because we trade with Europe and our currency is not that strong. But if the European Union's construct come apart, then we need to be ready to pick up the pieces and run as we can in a more flexible fashion. the overregulation, the overburdening of our economy through EU legislation. We'll need to find out what we should keep and what we should. It could be possible, because the Brussels Centre is incapable of dealing with these problems. So it'll go back to the nation state. It'll be Angela Merkel, it'll be Sarkozy, it'll be David Cameron, it'll be the Spanish Prime Minister, etc., who will have to deal with the current crisis. Certainly not somebody in the Commission in Brussels or in the Council.
You're involved with the EU's International Development Fund. How efficient is the distribution of what must be a sizable amount of money?
We are focusing all the time on poverty alleviation. That is rot. What we have to do is to do wealth creation. Instead of focusing on something called poverty alleviation, which means nothing except giving handouts. If we think about wealth creation, then we're actually creating a self-sustaining mechanism. China, for example, has taken 300 million people out by creating wealth out of a poverty trap. India's going along nicely too, but there are pockets of this happening in Africa where there is a bigger role for enterprise, free enterprise and so on. And that's what we should be focusing on, how to create wealth, not how to alleviate poverty. Creating wealth then eliminates poverty in the end.
It costs the UK a lot of money to belong to the European Union, including fines that are imposed for things like not displaying the EU flag on projects which have received EU funding. Where does that money go?
The European Union budget is about 106 to 107 billion. A lot of the money that the member states contribute goes to keeping a very inefficient agricultural sector going in Europe. About 40% of it goes to the agricultural budget, to subsidize the unmentionable and unthinkable. I mean, we have a subsidy which allows Greek tobacco farmers to grow tobacco, and we have another unit that collects it and burns it. Yes, I'm not making this up.
What's the solution then to that hugely inefficient distribution of money?
Accountability. I mean, the Parliament has, for the last, I think, 11 years, refused to sign off the Commission's accounts, because every year about 4 billion gets lost. We don't know where it went. Oh, really? You don't know where it went?
And for a company, that's absolutely unacceptable.
If you did a company, you'd have the entire board resigning. So we say we are not signing these accounts off. And every year, the member states give another tranche of money to the Commission, because we don't raise taxes. The member states raise taxes and collect the money and give it to the Commission. And every year they sort of lose about 5% of the budget somewhere. And the Court of Auditors say these accounts are dreadful, and Parliament says we are not signing these off. The whole thing is a mess. I mean, if you ask me what works well, even the single market mechanisms are not working very well. Because if there was a single market, why are different parts of Europe in different rates of growth? Why is Germany booming and Spain in great difficulty if it's a single market? They should adjust to comparative advantage. And therefore, you don't see that in the United States, or you don't see that in India, that Orissa is decaying and dying and in bankrupt, and Maharashtra is growing. You don't say, oh, California is doing very well, but Florida is down the drain. But in Europe, we say that. So even the single market doesn't work well.
Back to the drawing board then.
Back to the drawing board. The construct is incapable of meeting the challenges of the 21st century. It was a construct constructed after the war, Churchill's empires of the mind in a single European space. And it was constructed to prevent ever again a major war in the continental Europe by locking in Germany and France and all the other countries into a single space with a set of values, which democratic, pluralistic, diverse, but accountable values. That structure served well to see the end of Soviet communism and the destruction of Soviet Marxism. Now it needs a new construct to be able to work in cooperation with Russia, one of our primary energy producers and suppliers, to work as a good neighbor in the areas adjoining our boundaries in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and so on. And we need, therefore, a much more flexible construct, which will enable each of the member states to have the freedom to maximize their opportunities with the emerging markets in China, India, and Russia. We can't do that now.
Nirj, thank you very much.
Thank you.